far what I've heard is that we are all on the same page. It looks to me that everybody understands that capital markets will benefit everybody. So, where's the dog buried? Marshall Goldsmith has a good saying that simple is not easy. Let's try to figure this out in the upcoming panels. The first panel is about equity markets and will be moderated by COBALT partner Marina Kotkas. Please, Marina, come to the stage and bring your panelists with you.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, Karel, and good morning. It is a beautiful, fresh morning in Riga here today, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here and to kick off the first panel discussion of the day, where I will be joined by 4 esteemed speakers, and we will be talking about Baltic equity markets. More particularly, given the circumstances and where we are, we will be trying to cover a bit more on how we navigate, or how we could navigate IPOs in today's rather volatile markets. And I would say that capital markets have been really close to my heart for the last 15 years. As an advisor, I have been honored to advise on a number of IPOs and both local and cross-border bond offerings, and personally have been cheering for Baltic capital markets to grow and flourish. And when we look at the last 7 to 8 years, I think Baltics have been on the right path, at least taking steps in the right direction. But when we talk about equity markets, we of course cannot ignore the fact that the last couple of years have been difficult, and both a low interest rate environment and other macroeconomic conditions, as well as geopolitical challenges, have made it a bit difficult for the companies to come to the market. But in today's discussions, I think we will be joined both by the financial advisors and actual issuers who have either come to the market recently or are planning to come. And I think we will get a very good picture of what's going on in the market, what are the challenges and trends that are faced by the companies today. And then we will try to look into crystal ball and predict what would happen and how we can help to revive Baltic markets in 2025. So without further ado, I would like to invite to the stage the first panelist, Mihkel Torim, the head of investment banking at LHV Bank. I think Mihkel does not need a long introduction. He's known name on the market, and he has very long and broad experience in advising local Baltic IPOs, secondary offerings, as well as M&A transactions. Mihkel, please join me on the stage. Let's give a round of applause for Mihkel. So our next panelist is Modestas Sudnius, CEO of Eleving Group. As you all know, Eleving Group has made a very successful IPO recently, one of very little activity on the equity markets this year. So Modestas has been one of main architects behind the IPO, and he also has led his company to become and to be recently ranked as 41st fastest growing European company in the last decade, and the research made by Financial Times and Statista. Modestas, please join us on the stage. Next, I have a pleasure to invite to the stage Martin Gauss, CEO of airBaltic. Martin has been the CEO and chairman of executive board of airBaltic for more than a decade, and we know that under his leadership, airBaltic has successfully carried out a robust turnaround and now is planning an IPO. Thank you, Martin. Join us, please. And our last but not least panelist is Angelo Morganti, partner at STJ Advisors. Angelo has more than 20 years of experience in advising investment banking transactions, and he has worked on numerous IPOs in both Europe, Central Asia, and the Baltics, including the first IPO of the state-owned company in Estonia at Port of Tallinn. So good morning, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining me today on the stage, and I'm looking forward to a very exciting discussion. And I think let's start maybe logically, as I already mentioned, with looking at what happened or what has happened on the market, on the equity market for the past 12 months, sorry. So exactly from the time when we had the last Baltic Capital Markets Conference here in Riga. And maybe I will start with a question to Mihkel. So when we compare this year to 2023, so what have been main developments on the markets in the Baltics, and what have been main factors that have affected the markets?
Can you hear me? Okay, hello? Yes. So, hi everyone. I think last year when we were here at this conference, we were just about to launch IPO of Infortar in Estonia. And in general, I think the market has been quite difficult. It has been great for bonds. It's been, I think, amazing year for all bond issues, but not so much for equities. But still, I mean, we managed to be part of the Infortar IPO syndicate, which worked out. It was a difficult transaction, but the company has really performed ever since, and I think it's now trading up 70% or something around there. So again, even in difficult markets, if you have great companies that actually invest, grow, that's the main element. And then of course there was Eleving quite recently, which got also completed in quite difficult market environment. So, but coming to back to this market environment, it's not about Baltics. In Europe, overall equities and IPOs have been quite difficult. A lot of transactions have been pulled. So we're just going through this stage, but I'm pretty sure that this will turn better going forward. So until then, let's just grow the market as best as we can.
Mm. Thank you, and I think maybe just moving to Modestas, because you also mentioned Eleving Group as a recent debutant to the equity markets. I think it's a very good example of what you say, Mihkel, that the good company can manage to IPO even in difficult times. But I think I would like to hear Modestas' perspective as well, because obviously you knew what are the market conditions on the market when you were coming. So what was main factor driving your decision to come to the market regardless of that?
Sure. So good morning, everyone. And we talk a lot about timing. So of course, timing in capital markets is very important, but also there's like a business timing. And if you look at Eleving, we as a business, we are ready. Like we've been demonstrating good results. We've been demonstrating profitability, growth, and also, we knew that actually it's a good opportunity for us in the market to grow further, and raising additional equity could accelerate that. So from that perspective, timing for us as a company was very good. But of course, I can just to add to what Mihkel said that markets were not sending too positive signals, and we had, as a company, we had to be more pessimistic rather than optimistic. And how do you tackle that? And like in our case, it was really a lot of work put into pre-IPO phase, because in these times, I guess it's too optimistic to rely on something, miracle to happen, or that it would be only retail-driven IPO. So kind of our results show that it ended up being quite balanced IPO, but actually more institutional investor driven, and with institutional investors, that's the benefit, that with them you can have chats before that, you can prepare for that. So that's that gave us confidence, having quite a lot of these pre-IPO discussions, that we can make it. So without that, to pull the trigger would have been quite tough.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much. And when we talk about trends over the past 12 months, I think it's also very good to see maybe Angelo's perspective, who has a broader view, not only of the Baltics, but also how things are in Europe generally. So Angelo, also when Mihkel was talking about what have been trends in the Baltics here, do you agree that this is the trends that you also have seen, and how these compare to broader European or maybe US market as well?
Thank you and good morning, everyone. I think the trends in Europe are pretty much similar. So in Europe, we have seen this year an improvement in market conditions, i.e., the volumes of IPOs have increased year to date compared to what the overall IPOs volumes in 2023. They're significantly higher than 2022, which was a very challenging year, but they are materially below 2021. So overall, we see an improvement in market conditions. We see that it is critical to have a successful IPOs to do a lot of work and pre-IPO meetings to mobilize and engage with institutional investors, because clearly institutional investors, and in particular international investors, are critical in driving the valuation and giving comfort to the local markets and local investors on the levels of valuation. And finally, we see that what we've seen, that a number of deals have been supported by international demand, but the importance of local demand. And for example, I will mention two transactions we worked on as advisors in the recent past, which were two IPOs happen in Romania. And for both IPOs, it was critical to have local pension funds, local institutional funds, and retail component. Of course, the international investors are needed, but it's a combination of all these parts. So what is critical, and I think it's similar for what has been said, is basically all the work in engaging in pre-IPO meetings and educating investors, explaining the equity story and giving comfort of the quality of the business, and then getting to an IPO. So I think overall, in these volatile market conditions, it requires a combination of all pockets of demands and a lot of work in educating investors, which is what I think has been done by Eleving.
But the general trends you see a bit more optimistic in Europe than maybe we see here. Is this a correct summary?
I think, in Europe, we're seeing that there are different markets with different, I think, pockets of demand. We're seeing, how can I say, fragmentation. So the days where there were international demand supporting all the deals, I think, are no longer there. So to this extent, I think in Europe, it depends on market by market. And I think you've seen that the London IPO market has been relatively quiet in the past 2 years. And this is because there is an outflow of UK equity from UK equity funds, which are the cornerstone of UK IPO. So I think the challenge for each market is to attract investors to the equity market. And I think from this, I don't think the Baltics are dissimilar. Of course, the size of the countries is smaller, but also to a certain extent, the size of the deals is slightly smaller.
And I think we absolutely agree. I think this is also our feeling, is that the trends are global rather than local, and it is not correct to say that Baltics is in disadvantaged position in a way, but we all globally experience similar trends, but obviously depending on size of the markets, they may be slight differences.
Absolutely, and if I can, we worked on a number of transactions in different countries, with some priced, some didn't, and we saw exactly the same challenges of attracting investors. And I think the key differentiating element is that if you have transactions above 1 billion or 1.5 billion of capital raising, then it is a different type of transaction, because these are seen as must-own stocks, and therefore investors need to look at these companies, and most likely they will participate in an IPO. When you're not in that category, and again, this year I think there were 4 transactions above this size, which accounted, by the way, for 70% of the volumes. But if you're not in that category, you are in a smaller, then I think the themes are common, and we've seen it at STJ on different transactions which were not 1 billion, but they were below. The challenges are similar across markets. Italy, Nordics, Baltics, Eastern Europe, it's pretty much the same challenges.
Okay, thank you. And now turning to Martin, because airBaltic obviously announced a plan to IPO already a while ago, and I cannot not ask you where you are with the process, at least a hint, because I know regulatory constraints may not allow you to speak freely, but what can you tell us about your plans and where you are?
Yeah, so lawyers keep telling me I shouldn't say anything about the IPO, and but it's not me talking, right? We have so much public information, and the reason for that is that we are talking about a privatization of a national airline, which has happened in Europe not for a while, because the last one which was privatized was Lufthansa KLM Air France many, many years ago, and it was painful at the time. Each national carrier which becomes private is painful. Our story started already in 2019 when we felt this is now the time to go, but then COVID came, then the war came, so we had to wait. We used the time, we started formally the process last November, hiring the advisors, working on the prospectus. We had to do the bond, we had to reissue the bond before we can go. Now we're in a stage where it's clear we will be going for an IPO next year in 2025, not this year. And the difference maybe is the last IPO of an airline in Europe, of a European airline, was Wizz Air 10 years ago. At the time when Wizz Air went to the stock exchange, the aircraft which we fly today didn't exist. So what we told or telling investors around the world today, what is it? What is airBaltic? It's the strongest brand in the Baltic states. It's the most known brand. It has a fleet and an order book we can double in size in the next 5 years. We're the only airline in Europe which can do that. We have a strong management team. We show good EBITDA figures, but we have a history of 29 years not going into any bankruptcy restructuring. We kept all the debt from the past. That makes it a bit more tricky. And now we need to have the right time for an IPO. Very important is with the Baltic Capital Market Conference, we will do that IPO here at the local NASDAQ, and we want to raise 300 million in equity, so that's a different animal of an IPO. And we should see that when we discuss it publicly. We will have to do a dual listing very likely, but the focus is to be here and strengthen the capital markets. The finance minister said it earlier. And despite the local, sometimes negative noise, internationally, US, Europe, it's very well received what airBaltic does, and we are very positive about it. But next to the story, next to the management, we also need to have the right time for the market, and will not be put under pressure just to go if the time is not right, yeah? Because we have that one chance to strengthen the capital markets, which that's an IPO here. And as long as I'm in charge of it, I will say that, and therefore we are positive. We can't release too much information. We can't even say something if there's wrong statements made. We have our third quarter results coming, and that is when we report our results. That is when we can state facts. But I'm very positive this preparation was very professional. We have very good advisors, good consortium of banks around us, and I'm looking forward to it because, again, 10 years ago was the last airline IPO, and we are seen now, at least from investor side, as something completely different.
Thank you so much, and I think it's absolutely true that everyone is excitingly looking forward for this big transaction that is a very important transaction for the Baltic markets. But now moving forward and maybe diving a bit more into, we already started this discussion into, so what it takes in today's market to make a successful IPO, especially where we see that investors are more favorably, or looking more favorable at safe haven assets. And I think, again, I will start with Mihkel by asking, so we are talking about equity capital markets, but how do they compare to other markets, bond market, for instance, and what have been kind of trends there? And especially when we talk, we already touched upon this, that local IPOs have been heavily relying on retail and investor interest, right? But this has shifted over the past 12 months towards bonds and other assets, and obviously institutional investor demand is not also too strong. So what exactly is happening in comparison to other markets?
Yeah, maybe let's start with the comparison of the Baltic bond market versus equities. And when it comes to bonds, based on our experience and what we see, it's doing very well. And first of all, you know, the number of issuers that are relying on the local retail and institutions when it comes to, you know, bank issuance, when it comes to local smaller corporates. But then in addition to that, for example, Eesti Energia had their, it was first ever hybrid bond issued in Baltics in summer. What we saw as well is that there's a lot of international interest as well. So it's clear that if you have the, how to say, right instrument, right size, and right story, there is no problem of attracting large blue chip international investors to Baltic issuers. So bond market doing, I think, very well. The yields that they have been providing has been attracting a lot of retail interest. So there's local institutional involvement, international institutional involvement. And then when we sort of transition into equities, it has been quite different, again, you know, already for a few years. I think a lot of this retail demand that I think kind of in hindsight peaked in 21. I think NFIT Green was a, you know, very good example when it's like a kind of a song festival level subscriptions. So now it's very different, and obviously people are much more skeptical about equities on retail side. So there's no like given demand, or like you couldn't really expect that there's a certain number that retail will definitely subscribe for. International institutions, I would say that for the past 10 years the trend has been only that, you know, deals have to be bigger, liquidity has to be higher, so it's been you know, one-way street. And I think especially in Baltics, where eventually we have smaller companies, so let's say transaction size of 10 to 50 million to me seems to be the most difficult one, because you have to have institutional involvement, you have to have retail involvement, but it's tough to attract you know, a lot of large international names. But again, I think it's not a Baltic issue. It's more like, you know, where the markets are in general, and you know, once the interest rate environment sort of shifts a bit more, then we get more engagement in equities as well.
Mm-hmm. And maybe for reflection from Angelo as well, from Global's perspective, do you agree this is the situation, how we compare, when we compare equity market to other markets? And I cannot ask also, I cannot not ask also your view how the outcome of this recent US election seems to be affecting these trends in the future.
So I mean, I agree that with what Mihkel said, that liquidity is very important, and clearly the 10 to 50 million IPOs are the most challenging. I think what is critical to get to a successful IPO, which has changed in the last years, there are two elements. One is to have cornerstone investors, or to have good quality investors, anchor investors, placing an order in the early days. This is critical basically to allow an IPO to be successful. And then the other element is to, which is very obvious, is to launch an IPO when you have a good visibility on demand. So what we've been doing, and especially for smaller deals, is to look at all the pockets of demand, but very thoroughly and analytically understand what are the likely demand, and then launch the transaction. Regarding the recent events and the impact, I think it was partially already discounted by the outcome of the elections was to a certain extent discounted and expected by investors. And I think the positive is that we avoided what was the most concerning situation like in 2000 or 2020, where basically it took a long period to assess who was the winner of the elections, and also concerns that the outcome may be challenged or there could be social unrest. I think it's very positive that all these elements have been have been not that are not taking place, because if there is something that investors are afraid of, is uncertainty. And when you have uncertain conditions, the VIX index, which is what we call the index of fear, goes up, and that's when markets shut down. Well, we think now there is a clear outcome, and we will see what the implementation of the policies of President Trump will be and the impact on capital markets.
Yeah, we will be talking about maybe trends for the next year in a minute. But yeah, obviously my question was driven by the fact that immediately when it became clear that Trump has been elected as next president, the U.S. markets popped. So basically there was a significant wave of reaction from the investors as a positive reaction.
And I think what also I read is that the stocks which were more ESG or green have been suffering
exactly.
more. And clearly Tesla has been the clear winner, and also the Bitcoins have reached the highest level. So it's been pretty much in line with what, to a certain extent, was expected.
Okay, but maybe I will turn to now actual issuers, and Modestas and Martin, about your view on how you think the companies, what steps have your companies taken to prepare for IPO? So Martin already mentioned a bit about this. And what is the main factors that you think will appeal or are appealing to the investors in terms of your company specifically? So maybe Modestas, if you could start with talking about Eleving Group.
Sure. So I think what we're hearing here, that when everything is a little bit more pessimistic, then results have to speak for themselves. And then I think if a company is already demonstrating solid performance, and you're in a way, you're not selling a dream, like you're. I think that times have changed a little bit to what it was maybe 2-3 years ago, when you can do an IPO on really very forward-looking projections. So in our case, we had a track record and we had the results now. So that definitely helped a lot. And another thing, we're not a rookie in capital markets, so we're new to equity capital markets, but we've already went through school of debt, kind of having debt raised in capital markets, and we've issued our first bond 10 years ago. So we've combined, we raised and refinanced more than 300 million euros worth of bonds. So we had a know-how how to behave, and the company had to be prepared for kind of being semi-public, because once you have a public bonds, you are almost a public company, and that definitely helped us a lot as a management, as a company. We had all the reporting in place. We knew what prospectus is, and we had tested multiple banks in the past, so we knew which are the maybe right partners for this transaction. And I guess for a company which kind of comes from purely private business and does their IPO in a tough times, that's definitely additional challenge which we didn't have to face.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And Martin, what about you?
Yeah, I wish I would be in yours already. So then next year, maybe if I'm sitting here, I can talk about the success. Key for us is, when we now look at the pre-discussions with investors around the globe, is their feedback. It's what they like, what they don't like. And I said that earlier, they like the story, they like the growth perspective we have. They see the debt, and we need to have the right multiples. I think this is important in our industry. The multiples in Europe are not good. They were not good before the election. They even went down further now, while there's the opposite situation in the US. And I think with the changes, we just had the German government fail last night, we will see changes in Europe. And our industry in Europe is suffering from over-regulation and a lot of restrictions. European aviation industry is having a very bad time. I think with the changes in US and now the changes in Germany, we will see at the EU Commission a change in direction. And with reductions in over-regulation for our industry, because it's very tricky to be an airline in Europe, we might see the values of airlines in Europe going up again, because you need airlines to grow. There's no way to grow economies without airlines, and we are demonstrating this in the Baltic states. So I think we will see a very different picture in a quarter of a year from now, when the dust has settled, and the feedback from the market is okay about the story, about the team, about the aircraft, the brand. We just need to have the right timing and working on this. So I'm very positive, looking very much forward to sit in his chair and having done it.
Finger crossed that this will be the case next year. Maybe just to finalize this discussion, so you mentioned the fact that equity story is important. Maybe Mihkel, what contributes to successful equity story in your view in today's market?
I think in today's market, it's say well-governed companies, very strong track record, like Modestas alluded to this cycle in 2021, where you had a market where basically you can go with your hopes and dreams and potentially like a very short track record. But I think now experience matters, results matter, and just sort of focusing on the actual business, focusing on growth, focusing on investments, and giving the investors the sort of perception that the company is really there to stay and grow. I think it's really, to me, that's as simple as it is. I don't think there is like a specific thing in this market or now that's more important. But it's what I've seen from my experience is that strong companies that take capital market as a tool, as a platform, and it's not like, okay, we're at the peak of the market, maybe let's IPO now. Usually that doesn't work out in the end so well. So just focusing on core business, good management, well governed. That's as simple as it is.
So back to the basics, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and Angelo, maybe because we talked about liquidity issues, right, in today's market. And when we look at the Baltics, we talk about mainly mid-cap offerings, and sizes of the companies are obviously smaller than maybe airBaltic aside. So for this mid-cap offerings, what do you think as main things that need to be in place for a successful IPO?
I think it's the quality of the equity story and the business is critical, is convincing investors. And what I mean by convincing investors, it means educating investors. So explaining the business model, explaining the proof points, and giving comfort on the achievability of the projections. What does it mean is that if what we see for larger IPOs, you can probably do an IPO with one round of what we call pre-IPO early look meetings. When you're talking to, when you're looking at smaller companies, you need an education process which is longer to basically convince investors that the quality of the story is there, but most importantly, the management can deliver the story. If you give comfort on these two elements, then you can create what we call a base of a fan club, which basically will be the building block for your investor base of the IPO. And we think this is the way to create and enable IPOs of which are not $1 billion plus. And this is what we have done in a number of situations in various jurisdictions, where basically we work with the company, and it can take longer than what we expect to create this base of investors who feel comfortable regardless of the size of the deal on the quality of the business. We think this is the way to complete such deals, and we've done so, as I said, in Romania, and we're doing so in other markets, but it just takes a longer process.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely true. But let's try now to wrap up our discussion by trying to predict what is ahead of us. And maybe, Mihkel, so we didn't talk too much about geopolitical situation, but maybe let's just briefly stop on that. So we are here in the Baltics with close proximity to Russia. We cannot ignore that. But in your view, how does geopolitical situation actually influence us today? And assuming that nothing major happens in the coming 12 months, will this ease? Will this effect of this situation ease somehow if other factors are right for the market?
I mean, from my point of view, it's so difficult to say how is the geopolitical situation affecting Baltics compared to anything else. I mean, again, and if I'm just thinking about the bond market, I don't really see that that there is a massive issue. Definitely anybody can sort of think, what might the discount be, or how the investors look at the region. But this has been going on, for 3 years, and so when it comes to equity markets, I would say that this is not really an issue. The issue is the general market conditions, which is not specific to Baltics. And over the past 2 years, whenever I talk to any of my, let's say, colleagues in investment banking, whether they're in sort of bigger markets, whether it's London or whether it's Nordic, for the past 2 years, I'm always getting the answer that the IPO market is 6 months out. So now it's been 6 months out for past 3 years, and still the sort of message is that maybe in 6 months it's gonna get better. I would still allude to the interest rate environment, inflation, and just the sort of transition from bonds back to more risky assets. But then again, U.S. markets is sort of at its peaks, so it's been just the sort of primary market that's been a bit more difficult. So I would just stick to my guns and say that it's 6 months out. In 6 months it's gonna get a lot better. But going back to Modestas and also Martin, it's if the company needs the capital, they're anyway sort of in process of finding that right moment, finding that window where to launch this, and then you just in the end of the day, then you just do it. So I guess it's going to get better for equities, but for the past 3 years, there's consistently something happening, whether it's COVID, whether it's war. So a lot of moving parts, and I don't think it's going to get easier to make these predictions. So we just have to live with what we have and take decisions, as we go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. But Modestas and Martin, maybe just to continue on this positive note, which Mihkel started, that if company needs capital, it just needs to focus on doing this, right? There is no point in waiting endlessly for markets to pick up. But I mean, maybe Martin, expecting and hoping for a very successful IPO in the near future. How do you see this helps your company? Because you are doing this for a reason, right? So what's the reason for doing this IPO?
Maybe if we look to the audience, and the audience, all of you, who has flown on airBaltic, if you raise your arm, please. Yeah, so I think we have some good ingredients here. Within our history, carried 60 million passengers, and this year carrying more passengers alone than inhabitants of the Baltics. I'm very positive. Yeah, we have a very strong brand, and I think the public overall, with the highest rated Net Promoter Score airline in Europe now, the flying public likes us, and therefore I think the ingredients are here. As I said earlier, we need the markets also to be right, but everything else is doing very well, and we should not get too worried about local negative media. That is really isolated. It's just here. It's not outside, and 70% of our passengers are not coming from here. So the majority of our income is anyway generated outside. Still, everything we do is centered here, and we will be here. So I think we can transition this success story once we are allowed to talk to the public after we announce we do the IPO. That's the date we need to have. I think then we can tell everybody what we do and how we do it, and then we will see. We had the same situation when we issued the bond, a lot of skepticism, then it was a success. We recently topped the bond, which is an even higher success, oversubscribed. People like the bond, it's yielding very well. So we need to do it, and then we will see the success, and I'm on the positive side of life.
But you expect the IPO to be a platform for you to grow further, right? This is the reason you come into
We need it because we double in size. Yeah? So we have ordered 50 more airplanes to come in the next 4.5 years. They are coming, so we need to take them. We know also what to do with them. So yeah, it will be positive because we get the equity, we deleverage the company, we refinance the bond, we grow over the next 5 years. Yes, we need that equity to come in because our shareholders say they would like to sell the company and get that equity which is needed for the growth to come in from the capital markets. And therefore we are a good story for the capital markets because we have all the ingredients. I think we are in the right market. There's definitely room to grow here. It would be maybe more difficult to do it in already established markets. So I think the Baltics are ripe for a brand like airBaltic to be hitting the stock exchange, because if I look at the plans we have, what we do with the public once we go, it's very exciting, and I think everybody will talk positive about being part of that IPO because it's going to be so big. But we need to get to that point that I can talk about it because lawyers tell me don't talk. So what I just did, I will get a lot of criticism after this.
Thank you so much. Modestas, maybe quickly, a final few questions to all of you. Based on your experience with your recent IPO, what can be done to help the companies to come to the market? I mean, you mentioned a couple of things, but maybe just quickly a few thoughts.
Sure. So I think definitely education is very important, and I think actually it's being done. So there's a lot of effort put in here, and I think there's already a blueprint for companies, smaller, bigger, average size, kind of how to do it. Where's the banks you can trust who has an experience, where's like legal advisor. So it's easier these days to do an IPO than maybe it was 5 years ago. But of course, all goes down to the depth of the market. You know, where will you get the money from? And I think if I would have to mention one thing, definitely what's missing is a institutional investor in Baltics with a focus of investing in Baltic IPOs, Baltics equity. I think we have many different institutional investors, and I think there's probably enough of real estate investment funds, but to have a party which would have a focus to investing in Baltic equities, that would definitely help. That would help IPO companies doing IPOs, where you can go test your story. And I think I heard also very positive news from Finance Minister of Finance, who mentioned that there is an Altum fund being launched. So I think these initiatives, they are really critical, and they should really help and accelerate these companies going to the market.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I mean, pension funds are an essential part of our ecosystem as well that need to function well and to support the capital markets apart from these specific initiatives. So I think we are running out of time. Maybe just, Angelo, I maybe also would welcome your quick perspective when we talk about the year 2025. What you expect to be main events and main factors affecting capital markets also outside of the Baltics, maybe more globally?
I mean, I think it's the main focus of investors in the past years has been inflation, and I think looking at inflationary data, and there are different school of thoughts that the inflation now has been the inflation issue has been solved. There are other investors who are more skeptical and are concerned that there maybe the issue is not entirely solved, and I think this is what will definitely help the market conditions, because the worst which could happen is if there are increasingly concerned that the inflationary pressures are still there, and therefore there will be further increases in interest rates. That would be a negative impact on the overall market conditions. So I think that the outlook of inflation is going to be the main element. The other one, which is quite obvious and no one has the answers, are all the geopolitical issues and how will unfold, especially following the election of President Trump in the United States, because these two elements will be, I think, or can be the catalyst in one direction or the other for IPO markets and capital markets more broadly.
Thank you. And so the time is up, but I think we need to take a couple of questions from the audience. There have been a lot of questions coming in. And okay, so the technical solution now failed me. But one question was about raising of taxes now locally and specifically for Latvia. So the question for audience, so there is a decision to raise taxes, but how would that affect capital markets? Any thoughts on that while I'm trying to make it work again? Any thoughts of how taxation and changes in that will affect the environment?
Taxation, adding taxes is always difficult when it comes to the environment. So yeah, it's more of a, I guess it's a broader question, which taxes and whether it's related to capital gains or markets. But yeah, maybe.
I think you can think simple, like if there's higher taxes, and then probably there will be higher taxes when you get less income. Then you need to be smarter with your money, and I think investing them in capital markets, that's one way how to get back part of a revenue what you lose.
Okay, let's take another question now. It works. The question is, given that Latvia has lost 500,000 people since 2000 and holds 20 billion in deposits and 8 billion in the second pension pillar, what insights or actions can the capital markets and investors offer it? I think the question is rather, so there is a huge amount of money locked in deposits and pension funds. And maybe the question that the audience was interested in, can we direct it to be invested into capital markets instead?
I mean, it's probably the same question in Estonia or Lithuania as well. I think it's a gradual process, and in order for that capacity to move to the local market, you just have to develop the local market. Whether it's state-related bonds, whether it's you need to have just a bigger variety of different asset classes, different risk levels. So that clearly isn't happening overnight, but I think we're making good progress.
So thank you so much. So our time is up. It was a really insightful discussion from my point of view. I hope audience agrees, and let's make a big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.